Hey friends, welcome back to the channel and welcome to a little sit down chit chat video about, I don't know, kind of a whole bunch of topics that people have been weighing in on that I haven't had a chance, honestly, and just been really busy. And as you can hear, I'm still a little under the weather. And so, yeah, this article came out in the Business of Fashion. That's kind of, I've been thinking about this video, and then when this article came out about Chanel, I thought, you know what, let's talk about that, and it kind of leads into, I think, some of these other topics that I thought we might chat about. So let's start with Chanel and this very recent article from the Business of Fashion. So, according to Business of Fashion, Chanel's annual revenues dropped for the first time since 2020, sliding 4.3% to, I know, sit down for it, $18.7 billion last year. So that was a decrease. So its operating profit fell 30% to $4.5 billion. Okay, let's just repeat that. Okay, their operating profit was $4.5 billion last year. Now, I understand that that was a 30% decrease for them, which obviously is a huge decrease for a company, but they still made $4.5 billion. I'm not sure that I can feel super bad for them, but the main point of the story and the headline was basically that they are not going to continue with their enormous price increases that we saw starting in the pandemic. So starting in 2020, when we saw 10, 15, 20% increases, where the Chanel classic flap, the medium-sized classic flap, I think went from $6,800 to, what is it now, over 11,000? Is it like, or is it 11,000? I think it's, according to this article, I think it says $11,000. So they're still continuing with their expansion efforts. They opened 53 new boutiques last year. However, the majority of those were standalone fragrance and beauty shops. So not a full service boutique like, probably the majority of us that are watching this video shop at. They are planning on opening 48 more boutiques for this year. Again, it doesn't state this, but I'm assuming that, again, the focus is probably more on beauty and fragrance. And because luxury markets like China, Europe, and US are under a lot of economic pressure, they're working to expand in new countries like Mexico, India, and Canada, which I thought was really, really interesting. It says one of the most vibrant economies in the world right now is in India, where there's, quote, a deeply held tradition of valuing and appreciating traditional craftsmanship. How do we feel about that statement? Not about as it relates to India, but as it relates to Chanel and whether it is valuing and appreciating traditional craftsmanship. Just putting that out there. Anyway, it talks about the fact of how much money they're spending on marketing. They're still doing these elaborate and extravagant runway shows. The Métier d'Art, it says, was at the Westlake in Hangzhou, China. I'm not sure I pronounced that correctly, back in December. What I also thought was super interesting was that despite Virginie, or maybe I should say because Virginie left, I don't know. But it says ready-to-wear was one of the brand's fastest growing categories last year, which, as we know, a majority of the collections were designed by what they're calling here the studio, right? Or the just sort of creative team that works at Chanel, generally under the direction of an artistic director. So, you know, in the case of Chanel, before it was Virginie, now it's going to be Mathieu, how do you say his name? How do you say his name? Mathieu Blazy? I'm again butchering his name, who was at Bottega and is taking over the helm of Chanel. But, you know, he hasn't put his spin on any runway collections yet. They talk about the fact that they really want to give a new creative director time to absorb the vibe of Chanel before, you know, they really put their mark on a collection. And that, you know, even with that, it may take several collections before, you know, he really finds his groove and puts his own spin on Chanel. So one of the sort of mini headlines of this story is that leather goods lag. So makeup and skincare were the beauty division's strongest performers. Watches and fine jewelry experienced dynamic growth. And it says growing sales across ready-to-wear beauty and jewelry suggest the decline in Chanel's overall revenues could be largely attributed to the core leather goods category, a key driver of Chanel's profits. And then it goes on to say, as consumers across the luxury industry have balked at sharp price increases for handbags in recent years, Chanel's hikes have been particularly steep. Its iconic medium flap handbags crossed the threshold of 10,000 euro or 11,000 USD early last year, nearly double their price in 2019. At the same time, viral videos citing quality issues with the bags proliferated on social media. The company has since pulled back on punchy price increases. Quote, the average pricing effect we had for fashion was 3% last year, which I'm sure you will agree was perfectly in line with global inflation, if not less than that. We intend to maintain more or less the same policy, which is to monitor our prices in line with global inflation in 2025. In addition to slowing down on price hikes, the brand is working to reinforce the value proposition of its leather goods through splashy marketing, novelty, and revamped design. And then it goes to talk about how the Chanel 25 bag has, you know, been a big hit. So I don't know about you guys, but this last thing that I read of its leather goods, it's working to reinforce the value proposition of its leather goods through splashy marketing, novelty, and revamped design. Do we think maybe they should focus more on quality than splashy marketing, novelty? Now, you know, novelty is probably something that I think those of us in the luxury community would value, right? I think there are many of us, although, you know, everybody has their own opinion. I mean, obviously some people go to Chanel specifically for its, you know, classic timeless handbags like the classic flap. But on the other hand, there are a lot of us, me included, who tend to like more seasonal bags and, you know, things that maybe are a little unique, a little bit quirky, have different textures and fabrications to them, as opposed to just a classic flap, which if you guys have watched my channel before, you know I am not a big fan of. But yeah, I just thought that this was interesting. You know, glad to hear that they're not going to have some massive price hike. You know, I was on kind of a Chanel kick last year. It seems like my focus this year has been more towards Louis Vuitton, and I guess maybe sort of towards the end of last year and then into this year, which I guess maybe sort of brings me into my next topic of the whole, you know, is luxury dead? Am I bored with luxury? Do I still feel inspired by luxury? I would say I do. I think, you know, my buying habits have definitely changed, and I think that that was more a result of my no buy, low buy year last year that, you know, it really reinforced to me that what I want to bring into my collection are, as I said before, unique, special pieces, you know, things that are maybe classic with a twist, but, not just your average crossbody bag that's super functional, because I have average crossbody bags that are functional. Not that they're not beautiful and not that I don't love them. Take for example, my Loewe puzzle bags. A lot of people might classify those as just kind of a boring crossbody functional bag, right? I think a lot of people think of the Pochette Matisse now from Louis Vuitton as a kind of boring luxury crossbody, utilitarian kind of bag. But that doesn't mean that we don't still love them. But my point is that when I look at my collection, I don't necessarily see a whole lot of gaps. So I don't think that I'm bored of luxury. I think I'm just looking for more. And from, I guess, what I've seen, I've been leaning, as I said, more towards Louis Vuitton. I've really been loving the P9s, which are certainly a special bag. The Murakami collections have come out. So again, something a little more unique. I mean, yes, a Speedy 25 that I got in the multicolor is certainly a functional and everyday bag, but yet it's different, right? It's a classic with a twist. It's the multicolor Murakami. So that, again, was something that I was very willing to spend the money on to add to my collection because it was classic, but yet unique and a one-of-a-kind kind of piece to my collection. The wicker capucines, right? I mean, again, kind of a summer bag, more of a special bag for me. Very much looking forward to getting my strap back, but that's where I've been going. And what's interesting, when I said that, last year I seemed to be really focused on Chanel, right? I got, three minis? Yeah, 3 Chanel minis last year. And then before that, I was really focused on Fendi. So I find it interesting that I don't want to say that my tastes have changed. It's really been the direction of the house, I think, that has steered me in the direction that I've been going. So it's not that I'm not inspired. I think it's just what I'm looking for kind of changes. Which brings me into, I guess, this whole influencers, creators selling their, collections and things like that. We had whatever her name was, Nikki Sky, she wasn't getting rid of all of her collection. I can't remember. I mean, I watched the videos. That was quite a while ago. And then I think Sophie Chohet got rid of some of her bags and said she wasn't going to be buying certain things, I think, anymore. And then obviously the big one that everybody talked about was Lydia Elise Millen. Now, I used to watch Lydia religiously for quite a while, several years, back when they were still living in London. And I think they were living in London. And she was definitely more on the fashion side and, doing more beauty and fashion and things like that. And then obviously they moved into their country home and, she started doing a lot of interior design, etc. And then I unsubscribed from Lydia, and I'll tell you why. One had to do with the fact, and this is probably one of the bigger things, and I wish, I certainly didn't write down the name of the video or anything, but there was one video where her husband, Ali, was kind of body shaming her. And if you're familiar with Lydia, I mean, she has a killer body, okay? It rubbed me the wrong way immediately. I still continued to watch, and then it started kind of bugging me that she literally would redo a room and then seriously no more than 6 months later, she was redoing that room again. Now, don't get me wrong, everyone is entitled to change their mind, right? And, I totally get that, for example, the backsplash that we put into our kitchen, right? I thought I loved it. And then once we got the cabinets in and everything, I was like, you know, don't really think I love that so much. So could we just rip that out and replace it with something? I get it. People change their mind, but it seemed to be a continual thing with Lydia. It was like every room that she did, 6 months later, she was redoing it. Now, maybe it was that their whole aesthetic changed. And I do think that if you watch Lydia, you certainly saw her channel take a different direction, which is one of the reasons why I think she then thought to sell her bags. Not that they didn't align with her new, sort of what she was focusing on, although I think that is true, and I'll get to that in a second. So it's maybe it's that, her whole style was changing, but it just seemed very quick, I guess. And so it just seemed really wasteful to me. Now, I say that, and it wouldn't be uncommon for some of us in the luxury space to buy a bag and then maybe even within 6 months to a year sell it, because either we decide it didn't really work for us, or maybe we got caught up in the hype or something, and so we realize it's just not for us, and so we move it along. So again, I'm not saying that she isn't entitled to change her mind and to do things. It just seemed, I don't know, for some reason it just rubbed me the wrong way. Again, though, totally entitled to change her mind. And then, you saw her content really change. It became very vlog focused, which I love a good vlog, so don't get me wrong. But it was then moving into things that didn't really interest me. I'm not necessarily into the English countryside and horseback riding and, planting and gardens and, things like that. And now I guess she's into like sourdough bread, which, I know is a big thing right now. But yeah, she was going in a direction where it just didn't really interest me. In addition to, that was also the time where I really felt like I needed to pull back from content creators that were producing content that were more geared towards my fantasy life. Now, not to say that living on a farm or living on, in the English countryside is a fantasy life, but they were also at that time doing quite a bit of travel and sponsored travel and, Aston Martin ads and things. And again, just, that's not my lifestyle, okay? I also unsubscribed from Victoria in the Fro. I also unsubscribed from Tamara because, again, I think it was influencing me potentially in a negative way because I just don't live that lifestyle, and so it just became irrelevant to me, I guess. Now, I occasionally have watched some of Victoria's videos and I see she's kind of going a little bit more in the direction of Lydia. Now they're living in the countryside and, they obviously redid their house and things like that. But I think she's still doing more fashion and things than Lydia is. Not that Lydia is not doing still some fashion content, but I don't think it's really the focus necessarily of her channel anymore. Clearly, Tamara is still focused very much on fashion, but oh my God, if I hear her and what is his name? I'm blanking on his name because all they call each other is babe. It is like nails on a chalkboard to me. I'm sorry, I'll say it. It is, okay? I think it's wonderful that she's found love and her ring is absolutely gorgeous, and I watched the engagement and it was lovely and, romantic and all of those things, and having her dad on the tape recorder that when he asked for her hand in marriage. I mean, it's lovely. And I watched, I think, her birthday vlog where he took her on the Orient Express and whatever, but she lives a totally different life than me. Not that I don't like to watch people who live a totally different life than me, right? Because part of why I watch YouTube is that sort of escapism. And I think that's why a lot of you watch some of us luxury content creators, right? You may not necessarily be buying right now, but you still enjoy watching that aspect of, other people who are. But going back to Lydia and her selling her handbags, I missed, because again, I wasn't following her channel. I guess she sold quite a substantial part of her handbag collection maybe 6 or 9 months ago, something like that. And I think sort of was only left with her Hermes bags, or that's sort of the impression I got from watching the video where she said she was going to sell her Hermes bags. I feel horrible for her that she has felt the need to, keep a lot of her bags off property and, in some vault somewhere, so that, if she does want to wear a bag, she has to go retrieve it and whatever. I can certainly relate to that, to, having bags in storage for a really long time, and I did not really have access to mine. And that's horrible. That's horrible that she feels like she's in a position where she can't have her things that she loves, if she still loved them, with her. And the fact that she feels unsafe walking around London. Now, I was in London not that long ago, in 2023. I wasn't there for that long. I personally didn't feel unsafe walking around with my luxury bags, but I'm not doubting that it's unsafe. I'm just saying personally, I didn't feel unsafe walking around London. But, if she thinks it is, and, I know Sophie Shohat has had some incidences. So again, not calling either one of them liars. If you feel unsafe, then you feel unsafe, and you are entitled to have that feeling. And so it makes me sad that she doesn't feel comfortable wearing her bags in London. And the other thing is, I think she pointed out that, they just don't necessarily align with her lifestyle now, because she's spending so much more time out in their country home and, gathering eggs and working on her gardens and making her sourdough, that, she doesn't really have a need to carry her Hermes Birkins and Kellys around, right? I mean, I guess she could use her Birkins to gather eggs maybe, but that seems a little bougie. So yeah, I think it's fine that she did. I, like the fact, I think she gave some of the proceeds, if I remember correctly. I think is that right? Did she donate some of the proceeds or something, to some charity? But again, I feel bad that she didn't feel safe carrying them, but I think all of us, as I sort of said about the different luxury houses where I've changed, kind of every year I seem to have a different focus, maybe at some point I really won't have a great desire for these bags. I think, we all change, our priorities in life change, and we're all entitled to that. And if that's what she wants to do, then I think that's great. So I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is this whole, made in China thing and whatever. And I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of that I think many of us, and certainly those of us in the handbag tribe, because we have kind of a group text that we chat about things in, have, experienced some of these comments of not necessarily, there are ones certainly where people are like, they're made in China, I hope you, feel like an idiot that you spent, $6,000 on a bag that cost $500 or whatever, where they really think they're made in China. It's more the ones where they have taken that story and, and kind of morphed it into what you're paying is ridiculous for that item. And I think all of us would agree in the handbag community that yes, what we pay for these things is ridiculous. We know that the materials, we've all watched Tanner Leatherstein or Leatherstein, or however he pronounces the last name that he gives himself. We've all watched that. We clearly know that the materials and the labor that's involved come nowhere near the amount that they're charging for the bag. But if you understand business, you do know that there are things like marketing and, they have a whole back office of people that do things and designers and just the myriad of things, supply chain, all those things that run a company. And, yes, they made money. What did I say? 4.3 million in operating profit. They certainly make money, despite the fact that, yes, they have more than just the, cost of the goods and the labor that go into it. I 100% agree that it's stupid. Yes, stupid to spend, but it's my money. And I was watching a video earlier today, which has absolutely nothing to do with this, but I think is very similar to this concept. And the video was about influencers that are doing these ridiculously elaborate birthday parties for their kids and filming them. I mean, I'm talking about spending $5,000-$10,000 on a 4-year-old's birthday party. Actually getting venues, like renting out venues and decorating the whole thing and, bounce houses. Not that bounce houses are that big, but, all these balloon things and individually done bags for them with their names. They're all mine, anyway. And she was talking about the comments that a lot of these videos get, and they kind of diverge into two realms, right? One being, oh my God, I cannot believe that you are spending your money on that. I can't even afford groceries. To, you know what? If they can afford it, let them live their life. Like, if that's the way they want to spend their money, then go for it. And I think a lot of us in the luxury community get those comments, right? And it sort of, like I said, goes along with the kind of the China thing, this sort of idea of you're a fool for spending that much money on a handbag. And what I really thought was important is what this creator said when she was talking about those comments is, I can see both sides of it. Right? I mean, obviously, I'm the person who's buying it. So, I'm probably leaning more towards the, I can afford it, so let me live my life. But I certainly can appreciate that there are people out there who are struggling to just meet basic needs. And that the only thing that really we can do as people who consume this kind of content, and again, I'll go back to the, I'm not quite sure why you're watching a luxury channel if you think it's ridiculous and you don't understand why we would spend that much money. But, if you do, I think the point is that the only thing you can do is manage your reactions to it and to not let it either bother you from the standpoint of that somebody is spending money on something that you don't value and that you think should be used for something else. But also that it doesn't mean that you have to do that too. And so I just thought that was a good way of looking at people who may be buying things or experiencing a kind of lifestyle that you or I may look at as extravagant and ridiculous perhaps, and just be able to sit back and say, you know what? I'm gonna know that that's not how I would choose to do things, but let them be. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts about some of these topics. I know it was just kind of a chit-chatty, rambly video, but I yeah, just thought I would sit down and talk about some of these things that have been kind of mulling around in my head. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. You know it really means a lot to us. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, so click the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when I upload videos. If you want to keep on watching, there'll be another video on the screen for you to watch. Wherever you are, I hope you're having an amazing day or evening, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.